Montana Territory, April 1882. The storm hit just after midnight, sharp and brutal, ripping through the valley like it had a grudge. By dawn, the rain had stopped, but the land looked torn up and beaten. Trees were down, fences shattered, and the wind had taken half the roof off the schoolhouse. Amelia Jennings pulled her shawl tighter around her and stepped out of the little cabin she had rented on the edge of town, just past the creek. Her boots sank into the wet ground, but she kept walking. The scent of earth and broken pine filled the air. She had not slept. Too much wind, too much worry. She was halfway to the schoolhouse when she heard crying, not just one voice, two, young, thin. Somewhere behind the collapsed barn near the main road, she followed the sound around the debris, heart pounding. There, huddled beneath a broken wagon, were two children, mud-streaked, soaked to the bone, clutching each other like they were the only solid things left in the world. A girl, maybe 5. A boy a little older. "Hey, it's all right," Amelia said gently, kneeling in the wet grass. "I'm not going to hurt you." The boy looked up with wide, red eyes. "Papa's gone," he said. "He told us to stay in the wagon, but he did not come back." Amelia's throat tightened. "Where is your home?" the girl sniffled. "It fell down." She reached out her arms. "Come with me." "You're safe now." They hesitated, but then the boy nodded, took his sister's hand, and they let Amelia lead them back to her cabin. Inside, she wrapped them in blankets and set a kettle to boil. The girl's name was Maybelle. The boy, Matthew. Their last name was Dalton. Their father had gone out into the storm to look for help when the roof gave way. He had not returned. Amelia looked out the window, past the torn trees and the gray hills. She would find him. She had no choice. She found the man 2 hours later, not a mile from where the children had been. He was face down in the mud, one arm twisted beneath him, blood on his temple. Amelia dropped to her knees beside him. "Sir," she said, pressing her fingers to his neck. The pulse was there, weak but steady. She rolled him onto his back. He groaned. "Can you hear me?" He blinked, then his eyes focused on her. They were sharp, blue, and full of pain. "The kids," he rasped. "They're safe," she said quickly. "I have them, but you need help." "I cannot move my leg," he said. Amelia glanced down. His boot was soaked in blood. She tore a strip from her petticoat and bound the wound as best she could. "You are lucky I found you." He gave a faint, crooked smile. "You are an angel." "Hardly." She stood. "I am getting a wagon. Do not die while I am gone." "I will wait," he said, voice hoarse. Back at the cabin, Amelia fed the children warm cornmeal and tucked them under quilts, telling them their father would be all right. She hitched up the mule she had borrowed from the neighbor and returned for their father. It took all her strength to lift him into the wagon, but she managed. By the time they reached her cabin, he was fevered and shaking. She boiled water, cleaned the wound, and stitched it closed with trembling fingers. "Name's Abram Dalton," he said later when the fever had broken and his eyes were clearer. "You saved my life." Amelia met his gaze. "Your children were freezing to death. I could not leave them there." "They mean everything to me," he said. "Their mother died last winter." Amelia nodded. "I will keep them safe until you can." His eyes did not leave her. "I believe you." The days passed slowly. Abram was too weak to walk at first. Amelia kept the children calm, fed, and warm. She taught Maybelle how to braid her hair and read to Matthew from the Bible when he asked. Abram watched her quietly from the cot in the corner, saying little, but always with a look in his eyes that made her chest ache. One afternoon, she brought him tea and sat beside him on the edge of the cot. "You have been through hell," she said softly. "So have you," he replied. She shook her head. "I have no children, no family left, just a teaching job I am not sure I want any more." He studied her face. "You are good with them, with Maybelle and Matthew. They smile more now. They are strong. So are you." She looked away, cheeks warm. "I did what anyone would have done." "No," he said. "You did more." It was raining again when Abram took his first steps outside. He leaned heavy on the crutch Amelia made from a pine branch, but he moved, slow and steady. She stood nearby, arms crossed, watching. "Look at you," she said, grinning. "Moving like a man half dead instead of all dead." He laughed, wincing. "I got something worth living for." She raised an eyebrow. What's that? He looked straight at her. Them kids and you, her breath caught. Abram, I know it is sudden, he said. But I have seen the way you are with them. I have seen the way you look at me when you think I am not watching. I ain't much, but I would give you everything I have left. She stepped closer. You are not nothing, Abram Dalton. His hand reached out. She took it without hesitation. I am no man's charity, she said. I know, he whispered. That is why I want you. The rain fell soft around them. Behind them, Maybelle's giggle floated from the porch. Matthew called after her, but for a moment it was just the two of them. Say yes, he said. She looked into his eyes and nodded. Yes. By late May, spring had softened the land. Meltwater ran clear through the creek, and the cottonwoods near the ridge unfolded their pale green leaves like cautious hands. Amelia planted sweet peas along the cabin wall, her palms rough from tilling, her back sore in a satisfying sort of way. The schoolhouse roof had been patched by the town men, but she hadn't returned yet. She hadn't decided if she would. Abram's leg healed slow but steady. He could walk farther now, no longer needing the crutch, though he still limped when the air turned cold. He chopped wood with care, taught Matthew how to hold the axe safely, showed him how to split kindling with quiet instructions and a steady hand. Maybelle followed Amelia everywhere, asking questions about herbs and seeds, mimicking the way she stirred dough or folded linens. One afternoon, Amelia was kneading bread when Abram stepped inside, brushing dust from his sleeves. His shirt clung to his back and his face was flushed from the sun. I passed by the old claim up near Elk Hollow, he said, pouring himself water. Wasn't much left, but I saw a well and 2 good walls still standing. She pressed the heel of her hand into the dough. You thinking of settling there? He leaned against the doorframe. Thinking of building something, not just for me. She dusted flour from her fingers and met his eyes. You sure it's not too far from town? Close enough to get supplies, far enough for quiet. She wiped her hands and stepped toward him. What would you build? Cabin, small barn. Maybe a smokehouse if I can get the stone. She crossed her arms, head tilted. You do that with 1 good leg, he grinned, slow and sure. 2 hands still work. She studied his face, the lines near his mouth deeper now, his expression settled like the soil after the thaw. He wasn't rushing her, but the offer was there, steady as the ground beneath them. Later that evening, after supper, they sat on the porch watching the last of the light leave the sky. Matthew and Maybelle were inside, thumbing through a worn picture book Miss Barlow had lent them from the church box. What made you come out here? Abram asked, his voice low. She tucked her knees beneath her. I answered an ad. They needed a teacher. I needed to get away from Indiana. He waited. My father died in '79, left debts. I sold the house, gave what I could to the bank, and left, figured I'd make myself useful somewhere. He nodded once. You have, she glanced at him. What about you? He looked out past the trees. I worked cattle in Texas before the war, enlisted in '62. After, I drifted north. Took a wife in Kansas. She wanted mountains and open sky, so we came here. Amelia's voice was soft. You stayed for her. He didn't answer right away. I stayed because I wanted something different for the children, a place they could grow without fear. She reached over and rested her hand on his. He turned his palm up and folded his fingers through hers, rough skin against clean. They sat that way until the fireflies came. The next morning, Amelia found Maybelle in the garden, pressing her small finger into the earth beside a row of carrot shoots. Miss Amelia, can we stay here forever? She crouched beside her. Why do you ask? Because Papa laughs more now. And you hum when you cook. Amelia brushed a curl from the girl's cheek. We'll see what the summer brings. That evening, Abram brought home a bundle of cedar planks tied with twine. Roof beams, he said simply. She looked at the wood, then at him. You already started, he set the bundle down gently. I started drawing plans, but I want your say before I hammer a nail, her mouth curved, not quite a smile. You'd wait for me, he stepped closer. I'd wait as long as you needed. She looked into his eyes, then reached up and touched the edge of his collar. I don't want to teach other people's children anymore. He didn't speak, just watched her face. I want to help raise yours, she said. Then come with me, he said. We'll build it together. She nodded just once. That night, she packed away the last of the books she'd brought from Indiana. The wind outside had turned warm, brushing through the trees like a whisper of things still to come. By mid-June, the cabin near Elk Hollow had a foundation, solid and square, with cedar beams stacked neatly in rows along the edge of the clearing. Abram worked in the mornings, resting often but never idle. Amelia brought water from the creek in a tin pail, her skirts damp from the knees down, her hair tied back with a ribbon Matthew had found tangled in a bush and shyly handed her. She hadn't worn ribbons in years, but she'd worn that one every day since. They stayed in her small cabin on the edge of town while they built the new place. It was tight quarters, 4 of them under one roof, but no one complained. Maybelle spent her afternoons stitching a doll dress from scraps, and Matthew carved tiny animals from leftover firewood. They kept their work tucked into a box beneath the bed, and only showed it when asked. One morning, after the sun had burned off the last of the frost, Abram leaned on the porch rail and watched Amelia pin clothes along the line. "You always move like you're listening to something no one else can hear," he said. She shook out a shirt and clipped it in place. "I listen to the wind. It tells me when the weather's turning." He stepped down, favoring his left leg, and picked up a dry towel from the basket. "And what's it saying today? That you shouldn't carry lumber when your stitches haven't settled. I haven't had stitches in weeks. Doesn't mean you won't tear something open again." He held the towel out, carefully folding it in half. "You always this bossy?" "Only when I care," she said, then blinked, surprised she'd said it aloud. He didn't answer, but his hands stilled on the cloth before finishing the fold. Later that week they rode out to the claim together, Matthew perched behind Abram on the mule, Maybelle nestled on Amelia's lap. The trail curved through aspen and open pasture until the clearing opened wide, ringed by pine. A few meadowlarks darted low through the grass. The air smelled of pitch and sun-warmed bark. Abram dismounted first, reaching up for Maybelle. "We'll need to clear those rocks if we want a garden." Amelia slid down, dusting pine needles from her skirt. "You thinking vegetables or just flowers to keep the bees happy?" "Both," he said. "And maybe a patch of corn if the soil's kind." Matthew wandered toward the edge of the trees, dragging a stick through the dirt. "We could build a coop," he said, "for hens." Abram looked over at Amelia. "He's already planning a fence." "Good," she said. "You'll need help if you want it built before snow comes." They spent the afternoon marking out the rooms with twine and stakes. Amelia paced the outline of what would be the kitchen, imagining where the stove might go, how the windows would catch the morning light. Abram stood beside her, holding one end of the twine, his hand brushing hers. "You sure you want to share your space with all of us?" he asked quietly. She kept her eyes on the line between them. "I don't want it if it's not shared." He dropped the twine and reached for her hand, dirt beneath his nails, skin warm from the sun. "Then we'll build it right." The children chased each other through the grass, their laughter echoing off the trees. When the sun dipped behind the ridge, they gathered their tools and rode back down the trail, the wagon empty but their plans full. The next day, Amelia walked into town with a list in her pocket and a basket looped over her arm. She stopped at the dry goods store for nails and lamp oil, then crossed to the dressmaker's to ask about muslin for curtains. As she stepped out onto the boardwalk, she found Miss Barlow seated on a bench, knitting something pale and fine. "You've got a look about you," the older woman said, lowering her needles. "Like someone who's found her place." Amelia paused. "Maybe I have." Miss Barlow raised an eyebrow. "Is it that cowboy, the one with the quiet eyes and the limp?" "I'd call him a man," Amelia said. "And I don't much care who notices." Miss Barlow smiled, tucking her knitting into a cloth bag. "You always were stubborn. I hope he's worth it." "He is," Amelia said, adjusting the basket on her arm. "And I'm not waiting for the world's blessing to be sure." She walked back home with the wind at her back and the smell of rain somewhere distant, tucked into the folds of the hills. That night, as she sat with Abram near the fire, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded scrap of paper. "I want you to see something," he said, handing it to her. She opened it slowly. A rough sketch, done in charcoal and pencil, showed the cabin with a porch and chimney, a garden plot beside it, and 4 names scrawled under the roofline. Abram, Amelia, Matthew, Maybelle. She stared at it for a long moment. "You already wrote me in," he met her eyes. "You were there before I drew the walls." She folded the paper carefully and tucked it into the bodice of her dress. "Then let's make it real." The roof went on in July, cedar shake laid tight and straight, the scent of fresh cut wood thick in the air. Abram nailed from the ladder, his weight careful, his movements thought out between each swing. Amelia handed up boards and kept the rhythm steady, sweat darkening the back of her collar. The children played in the shaded patch behind the cabin, stacking flat stones into little forts, their laughter rising between hammer falls. That evening, after the last board was placed and the sun had dipped low behind the ridge, Amelia lit the lantern and set it on the new porch rail. The light cast a warm glow across the cabin's front wall, unfinished but solid. Abram stepped up beside her, rolling his shoulder. "You'll have to paint that wall before winter," he said, eyeing the grain. "I will," she answered. "But for now, it's enough just seeing it stand." He looked at her but didn't speak. His hands hung at his sides, still carrying the quiet tension of work not yet done. "I know that look," she said. "You're turning something over." He nodded once. "I sent a letter to my brother in Kansas." "Told him we're settled." She turned fully toward him. "Will he come? Maybe next spring. He's got a wife and 2 boys. I thought, if he comes, we'd have space by then. We'll have room." Amelia took that in, her gaze steady. "You're thinking ahead. I've never had reason to before." She didn't answer right away. "Then, do you want a minister?" He looked surprised. "You asking?" "I'm asking if you want it done proper. Not for the town, but for the children, for us." "I want your name beside mine," he said. "If a minister's how we do that, then yes." She nodded. "Then we'll speak to Reverend Clay after the harvest dance." He reached for her hand, calloused fingers wrapping around hers. "You still sure?" "I wouldn't be here if I wasn't." Behind them, the door creaked open and Matthew stepped out, blinking in the lantern light. "Papa, can I sleep out here tonight?" Abram glanced at the boy, then at the clear sky above. "If you've got a blanket and your boots by your side, I don't see why not." Amelia crouched to brush a stray twig from the porch. "You'll need to wake early." "We've got berry jars to fill before the traders come down from the pass." "I will," Matthew said, already curling up in the corner with an old quilt. Abram leaned against the post and looked out into the dark. "You ever think you'd be raising someone else's children?" "No," Amelia said. "But I don't think of them that way anymore." He turned his head, catching her eyes in the lantern's flicker. "Neither do I." In the weeks that followed, the cabin filled in. Walls were chinked with clay and straw, the chimney shaped stone by stone. Amelia stitched curtains from the muslin she'd bought, pale blue with tiny white leaves. She pressed them smooth and hung them over the east windows, where the sun would hit first. Abram built a cradle from leftover pine boards. He didn't say why, and she didn't ask, only ran her fingers along the smooth edges and said, "It's good work." One morning, Maybelle sat on the floor weaving rushes into a small basket, her face pinched with concentration. Amelia knelt beside her. "Where'd you learn that, Mrs.?" "Keach showed me," she said. "She said I've got good fingers for it." "She's right." Maybelle looked up. "Can we give this to the preacher's wife for her baby, if you want?" Amelia said. "She'll be glad for it." The girl nodded and bent back over her weaving, the rushes whispering against each other. By August, the air turned dry and thick with the scent of sun-warmed hay. The family took to walking the claim in the cooler hours, Abram's limp less pronounced with each passing day. One evening, as they circled the edge of the property, Amelia paused near the fence line. "I'd like to plant apple trees here," she said. "Maybe 2 rows. It won't bear fruit for years, but when it does, it'll be worth the wait." Abram looked over the spot, then down at her. You thinking that far out? Yes, she said. And farther? He reached for her hand again, slower this time, both of them standing in that golden light, dust rising from their boots. She leaned into him, resting her head below his shoulder. We'll plant them together, he said. And the children'll have shade when they're grown. She smiled, not looking up. They stood like that until the sun dipped below the ridge and the first stars blinked out above the trees. September brought a dryness that cracked the earth and bronzed the tips of the grasses. The garden, though modest, had held through the heat. Beans curled on their stalks, and a few late squash clung low to the vine. Amelia crouched beneath the porch eave in the late morning light, slicing the last of the onions to hang for winter drying, her apron stiff with dust and salt from her sweat. Inside, Maybelle was humming softly while brushing the doll's hair with a bit of bone comb. Matthew was out back with Abram, stacking the last of the split wood beneath the lean-to they'd built together. The boy no longer needed reminding about his chores, and when he worked, his eyes carried a quiet pride that hadn't been there in the spring. Amelia rose, brushing her palms on her skirt, and stepped inside to wash her hands. Abram entered a few moments later, carrying a worn saddlebag over one shoulder. His shirt was damp at the collar, and his hat hung from 2 fingers. I found a letter waiting at the post, he said, setting the bag near the hearth. From the land office. She looked up from the basin, and, his mouth curved into something slow and sure, it's ours. The claims recorded, papers signed. She dried her hands and walked to him without speaking. He reached for her waist, resting his forehead against hers. I never thought I'd have a home again, he said, voice low. You didn't, she answered. We made one. That evening, with the last of the sun warming the porch floorboards, Abram pulled a narrow box from beneath the cot. He placed it in Amelia's hands without a word. She opened the lid slowly. Inside was a slim gold ring, worn smooth at the edges but still shining. It had belonged to his mother, he said. He'd kept it tucked away since the war, never sure when it would feel right to offer it again. I don't have much, that's fine, he said, but I'd like you to wear it. She slipped it on without hesitation. You give me your steadiness every day, there's nothing finer than that. They were married the following Sunday in the glade behind the cabin. Reverend Clay rode up from town with a Bible wrapped in oilskin, and the 3 neighbor families came with baskets of food and a fiddle to mark the day. Maybelle wore a clean calico dress with blue ribbons tied at her wrists, and Matthew stood with his shoulders squared, holding a bouquet of wild aster for Amelia. She wore no veil, only a braid wrapped around her crown and a borrowed brooch at her throat. When Abram took her hands beneath the pine branches, his voice held steady, though his thumb trembled slightly against hers. No more waiting, he said, eyes never leaving hers. This is the life I choose. And I choose it with you, she answered. They were man and wife by the time the sun reached the treetops. The neighbors stayed into the evening, passing whiskey and pie, and when the music started, Abram led Amelia in a slow, careful turn through the grass, his limp forgotten in the sway of her hand in his. That night, after the children were asleep on their straw pallets and the fire had burned low, Amelia stood barefoot by the window, the ring glinting in the moonlight. You're quiet, Abram said from the bed. She turned, arms folded over her ribs. I was just thinking how strange it feels to have everything I need in one place. He sat up, holding out a hand. Then come here and feel it real. She crossed the room and climbed beneath the quilt, resting her head against his chest. His breath was deep and even beneath her ear. You still listening to the wind? He asked. Not tonight, she whispered. Tonight I'm listening to you. They lay there, wrapped in the hush of crickets and the soft creak of the pine beams above, the weight of the world finally set down between them, years past. The apple trees took root and began to bloom, white blossoms spreading each spring like lace across the sky. The cabin grew first a second room, then a loft. A cradle held a new child before long, a girl with Abram's quiet eyes and Amelia's steady hands. Matthew took to carpentry, his shoulders broadening with the seasons, and Maybelle learned to read the weather from the shape of the clouds just like Amelia once had. The land gave them enough. Not much, but enough. They stored away jars of honey, smoked meat, dried herbs. Abram's limp never left him, but he bore it the way he bore everything, with patience and purpose. Amelia taught her daughter to weave baskets and her sons to braid rope. She never returned to the schoolhouse. Her teaching stayed close now, threaded into the rhythm of daily life. Some mornings, she'd find Abram sitting on the porch before dawn, a cup of coffee cooling in his hand as he watched the light touch the tops of the trees. "Still up before the rooster," she'd say. He'd glance her way and answer, "I don't like to miss any of it." They grew old together, slow and content, their days marked by small labor and long glances, shared bread and quiet laughter. The cabin stood through storms and dry spells alike, solid as the love that built it. And when folks passed by on their way to town and asked if that was the Dalton place, someone would always nod and say, "That's the one." Built it with their own hands, still live there, still in love, and they were. Always.